Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to share my time with a member from Louis Saint Laurent as well, so I want to make that notice right now. What a great day, Mr. Speaker. I have involvement in 2 portfolios, and they're agriculture and human rights, and today, of course, is National Agricultural Day. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but it's great that we can celebrate the contribution that agriculture makes to our country. But for the rest of today, we get to talk about the issues of religious freedom in Canada. And this is exciting, Mr. Speaker. We had a good debate last night, and we'll discuss some of the issues all day today. And we don't often get a full day to deal with some of these issues. I'm going to talk a little bit today about the Opposition Day motion. I didn't think when I came here this morning, Mr. Speaker, that there was anything that we could even disagree on the terms of this motion. I had expected that this would be one of those rare days in Parliament, a day during which all parties could agree on the substance of a motion, and then we could move the issue forward together. It's an opportunity today to talk about the challenges we face and to propose solutions to these very real issues. And I hope that all of our colleagues in the House can get on the same page and can deal with these issues seriously. Now, Mr. Speaker, the motion starts exactly where we should start, recognizing that although we hear most often of atrocities in other countries and regions, that we are not immune to extremism in Canada. Every person here in the House was appalled by the recent and senseless violent acts at a Quebec City mosque, and that is noted in the motion, Mr. Speaker. We've already, and again today, we express our sympathy to the victims of the horrific Quebec City shooting. No one in this House can express anything but our deepest condolences and a revulsion at what happened there. People were attacked while they were praying, over 24 people shot, several killed. Our motion begins with where it must, which is by recognizing them. Now, Mr. Speaker, our motion moves from there to condemn all forms of systemic racism, religious intolerance and discrimination of Muslims, Jews, Christians, Sikhs, Hindus, and other religious communities. And what stands out for here, Mr. Speaker, is obviously the inclusiveness of this motion. Though it does list the half-dozen largest faith groups in Canada, it obviously includes all religious communities in Canada. And there's no sense of excluding any of them. We know that this is important because some of the smallest communities, such as the Baha'i, are some of the people who have faced some of the most severe persecution around the world. And so we want to note and recognize all religious communities. Now, Mr. Speaker, every faith group has a story of being at odds with the culture around them, and these stories often involve periods of persecution and discrimination. I've been able to host 5 annual parliamentary forums on the Hill dealing with the issues of religious freedom in the last 5 years, obviously. The first took a look right at this very subject. We invited 6 or 7 of the faith communities to come and to tell us about their perspective and their history as it relates to persecution and to religious freedom. Now, these histories were fascinating, and as we move ahead with this motion, Mr. Speaker, perhaps we could make that part of our request to the committee. We'll talk about our request to the committee a little bit later, but I really think that we need to take time, this is going to be referred to a committee, to hear those stories, to really understand the depth of people's commitment to their faith. And every member here obviously condemns all forms of systemic racism, religious intolerance, and discrimination of all religious communities. Now, Mr. Speaker, the motion moves on to call on the Heritage Committee to actually do some work, that it take a good, solid look at religious discrimination in Canada. We want to give faith communities a chance to come and to tell their stories, to give their version of where they feel they are being pressured, on where they have been pushed aside. Now, last night, both the NDP and the Liberals in the House here talked about the importance of such a committee. We want to bring this motion forward to provide the opportunity for that. And actually, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to being part of that. I hope that I can be part of that committee when it is struck. Because in these hearings, I believe there are all kinds of things that we can take a look at. There are many questions in Canada that we need to address and that we can take a look at. This issue of religious freedom is becoming increasingly important, not only in other parts of the world, but in our country as well. I think it's fair to take a look at faith in Canada, the role of faith in our country. It's also fair to take a look at the role that non-belief plays in our country as well, because we have people who see things very, very differently in our country. But what is faith? What does it play? What role should it play in the future of our country? How do we balance, and this is part of the discussion that we're having, the freedom of belief or non-belief with freedom of speech? There are issues always around freedom of speech and whether people can say the things that they want to say while others are run the risk of being offended by the comments that are being made. What is the role of religious symbolism in our country, Mr. Speaker? What freedom do private institutions have in expressing their core values? That would be a very important issue, I think, for that committee to take a look at. Take a look at the judiciary and its role in the establishment and protection of religious freedom in this country. We had a presentation actually at one of our forums on this very issue about the role that the courts have played in rulings on religious affairs. Now, one thing that was actually very clear about that is that there's been no consistency in those rulings. There's no thread that runs through them that Canadians can say, oh, this is how the court sees the issue of religious freedom and religious discrimination in Canada. And I guess there's always a question of whether we can examine the role of judicial organizations. What role do they play in the future as well? Perhaps we could take a look, Mr. Speaker, at the role that educational institutions play in limiting freedom of speech or in advancing it on faith issues. There's lots of concern. We hear about these almost monthly about secondary institutions and the role that they're playing on free speech issues. That might be something that the committee would also like to take a look at. I think one of the other things that we probably need to talk about is, are we going to be talking about some of the religious beliefs from other countries that are brought in to our country as people come here? We had a panel about a week ago on the Ahmadis in Pakistan and the pressure that they face as the government has brought in legislation that has changed their position in their society and has restricted their ability to function as full citizens. We've had debates in the House here about the Yazidis. We will have their community coming here soon as well. We know there are large issues with the Rohingya community in Islam, and we have a Rohingya community in this country as well. What role do we have in encouraging and speaking to these people and about their faith and the role that it plays in their lives as well? So, Mr. Speaker, I see this as a really exciting opportunity, as an exciting challenge. It could be some of the most significant work, I think, that a committee has done on Parliament Hill in a number of years, because, as I pointed out last night, we really need to start to get some of these issues resolved before division becomes the order of the day. And I think it's time that Parliament took a look at this, and they stepped forward and said we need to take a look at the issues, some of the hostility that's being exhibited in this country towards religious belief, and we need to find some ways to deal with that. So after listening, Mr. Speaker, the committee is asked to do two things. One of them is to come up with an evidence-based, community-centered approach to dealing with religious discrimination. And this will be a huge job. You can see the challenge, I think, probably it's obvious, but we believe that it can be done. And again, that report would be groundbreaking if the committee takes its work seriously. The second instruction to the committee is to come up with a way to track hate crimes for all religiously motivated crime. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, in this country, things are not perfect, but in our government, we work to make sure that these issues of faith were of a priority for Canadians. We always kept in mind the three principles of religious freedom: that people to be truly free, people must be free to be able to believe or to reject belief as they choose. They must have the opportunity to change that belief if they want to, and they must have the freedom to be able to practice their beliefs. Our government has highlighted those issues. We made them a priority. In 2011, we formalized that commitment with a promise to establish the Office of Religious Freedom. Small budget, small number of people. They played an extremely significant role around the world on these issues. And so, we believe that there is a place for this to be discussed in our country. We need, as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker, to respect the right of people not to believe as well, because this is another factor, another very important factor in these conversations. I've had the opportunity to be involved with a multi-faith group of legislators who are pursuing the issue of religious freedom, and we talk about how these things are taking place and how they're impacting our country. So Mr. Speaker, I see my time is almost up already. I'm sorry to hear that, but we're trying to approach these issues in a positive way. We in my office actually are in the process of setting up a 6th Parliamentary Forum on Religious Freedom sometime in April. We welcome all members to come out to that. In the past, it's been supported by members of various parties, and it's one more place that we can come to discuss issues of domestic and international religious freedom. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, there's lots to do. It's an exciting time, and this motion has gotten me fired up on these issues. I look forward to being able to work with my colleagues around the House on this. We look forward to a positive, an inclusive, and a mature debate today on the issue of religious freedom in Canada.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage.
I thank the member from Cypress Hills Grasslands for his comments today and for commencing this debate today. It's an important one. As he knows very well, as he participated in the debate yesterday on motion M103, the only significant and salient difference between the motion of the member from Mississauga, Erin Mills, and today's motion is the term Islamophobia, which we on this side of the House believe is a fundamentally important issue about naming Islamophobia for what it is. And I want to read something to the member and ask him a question. Now, what I'm reading is that, quote, some have suggested motion M103 singles out Canadian Muslims for special treatment. This is not true. The House of Commons has long had a tradition of passing motions denouncing discrimination and hatred against particular groups, especially religious minorities. For example, in recent years, the House of Commons has adopted similar motions regarding Jews on February 22, 2015, Yazidis on October 25, 2016, and Egyptian Coptic Christians on October 17, 2011. That's a statement from the member from Wellington Halton Hills. I wanted to ask my friend Opposite about his comments and whether he agrees with the statement from the member from Wellington Halton Hills and why Islamophobia is not contained in today's motion.
Member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Well, I know the member was here last night when we were having the debate on their motion last night, but the issue, and he heard that last night, was that the definition was not provided with that word. And as I guess you can go back and take a look at the blues from last night and certainly get a broader perspective on that. But the member who brought the motion forward a couple of days ago on a panel said, well, it's up to the committee to define Islamophobia. We said that's not good enough. You brought a motion forward, you expected the House to support it. You could at least define the terms that you're using in your motion. And so we believe that this motion is much more inclusive. As just by reading it, we can see that. And I actually would encourage my Liberal members across the way to be supporting this. We know that they're getting that word from their constituents. We know that there's pressure being put on them to support a motion that is as inclusive as this one.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Cypress Hills Grasslands for bringing this forward. I would like to encourage everyone here, in addition to the many proposals being made for us to navel guys inside into various committees, is that we reach out to religious communities in our constituencies and help them come together and discuss these matters. That's going on in my riding, and I'm very proud of the religious beliefs to do this together. I'm wondering if the member could address a couple of questions I have. Can I presume then that the call is also to consider supporting our call for additional action to protect Canadians who are being turned away at our southern border because of either their race or their religion? And does he also think that maybe this is a matter for other committees, including Justice and Human Rights, since he wants a review of hate crime reports?
Member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Well, certainly, Mr. Speaker, today's motion focuses on the religious discrimination, the religious intolerance, and if the member would like to bring forward a motion on some of these other issues, I'm sure we'd be more than happy to discuss that in the House here. But, you know, I'm proud of our party. We've always been the party of human rights. We've always been the party that have believed in that. It goes back as far as John Diefenbaker and the Bill of Rights, where he defined the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and freedom of expression that are still so important to us today. So we've got a long history of interest in these issues, long history of protecting them, and today will be one more step in that.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Mount Royal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Honourable Member for his motion and the careful consideration he gave in terms of drafting the motion, and I appreciate the inclusivity of the motion. I think the real issue for many members on this side of the House is the lack of the word Islamophobia that was present in M103, and I believe that Islamophobia should be defined, and I'm wondering if the Honourable Member would be willing to add at the end of the first sentence senseless violent acts at a Quebec City mosque, which speaks to an irrational hatred or fear of Muslims known as Islamophobia. There I have defined it, I have put it in context, I've said that it's an irrational hatred and fear of Muslims. I've said nothing else to further define it, to do anything to take away freedom of speech. And I'm wondering, would the member consider working with me this morning to find an amendment that would make everyone in this House be willing to support the motion so that we can have a unanimous motion?
Honourable Member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Well, I hope the member opposite isn't being mischievous, because it's my understanding that the Liberals have already come out and said that they are going to oppose this motion. They're going to conflict their own members by doing that, and that actually is an issue that they're going to have to deal with over there. We're of one mind on this side.